lot of us feel that the capitalist press is the source of a lot of distortion of the truth. Do you think there is any chance of a re-emergence of a really local press run by amateurs, drawing on local sources of information and addressing local issues with the gospel passion?
I do think that it's possible. I do think that the bedrock of our freedoms is local. Without local journalism, there's no sense of place, there's no thriving continuity, and so on, and that is my background. I don't think that amateurs are the answer. I think that's actually, if I may say so, a typical churchman's view. Because anybody who can write a sentence is regarded as a good journalist. And it takes 2 years to be properly trained on the job, as well as intensive training in law, which we need more than ever, public administration, and not to mention technology. Now, we can't go backwards, and David talks about the reinvention of journalism. My hope is that it will start local, but we've got to understand that the role of the journalist is something very specific.
If journalism really started off in the religious debates and the pamphlets of the 16th and 17th century, which were extraordinarily partial, you're either a Catholic or a Protestant or whatever, isn't it always sort of naive to believe that journalism of any sort can pretend to be objective? And when it does pretend to be objective, it's really hiding its assumptions and hiding its agenda. So I wonder if people talk about truth-telling, if any of us know what we're really saying.
Could I just start by saying that Ian was very helpful to me in the writing of this book?
Are you going to now say but?
Not at all. You put your finger on something that I do address in different ways in the book. We have 4 Gospels because we don't see anything from exactly the same place. God has allowed a space for us to dissent from whatever the truth may be. But, for example, Daniel Defoe saw it as his Christian job to moderate extreme opinions of all kinds and allowed himself to be employed by newspapers of different stripes. Not because he was just going to where the biggest purse was. Really, he talked about this several times, and it's wrong to be cynical about Daniel Defoe. So he wanted to moderate extremism, but that didn't mean that he felt he had a monopoly on the truth. So that's one way, that's 2 ways of addressing your question. A third way would be that we used to have a newspaper in which there were different writers and different points of view within a functioning public interest organ, if you like. And I think that Craig talks about a pluralism, a licensed pluralism. I say in the book that we've got to allow the wheat and the tares to grow up together, so long as we allow the wheat.
Right.
And that's not what we're not doing. I mean, I know a very senior BBC correspondent, and I mention it in the book, and I'm not allowed to name her, who was told by her producer when she went to cover ISIS, don't mention the Christians.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Paul, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, if I may, I want to be careful there are real philosophers in the room, but talking about words such as objectivity or impartiality, I do think impartiality is possible, but there's no impartial definition of what it is. what I mean by this is, in writing a news story, it's shaped by what you think is important. So your worldview, to use a hackneyed term, shapes what you think of the news, how you cover it, and so on. But within that, one should strike to use a word fair, impartial, truthful. I mean, if you made up quotes or said things which you believed weren't true, that would be a violation of your calling. So you cannot there isn't a view from nowhere. So who you are, your history, your beliefs will shape what you see news is. But within that, one should strive for impartiality. It's a lot more complicated than that, but that would be a simple way of putting it.
Now, epistemology, my definition is a very simple one. It's how you go about knowing something so you can trust the results of the knowing process. Every journalist has an epistemology. The problem is in modernity, they don't think they do. They think only people like Jenny has an epistemology, or Esther. And I think one way to start to get at this, and the journalists might not like this, but let's go for thick journalism and not thin journalism. So that's a sociological distinction. Thick deals with nuance. It embraces the whole picture. What we've got nowadays is this dreadfully reductionistic rubbish in which we reduce the glorious and broken and beautiful and horrendous texture of the human drama to this modernist gruel that is as thin as anything. Oh, you've got me excited.
Neil Postman pointed out years ago, news has become a form of entertainment. It seems that with the rise of the online, this has become even more extreme. How do you find a business model for honest journalism?
So you've got your ethical standards. But then, and this was a big aha for me, was I thought ethical standards were our journalistic values. But, well, no. Values, ethical standards, how you're supposed to behave. Your values and beliefs are how you actually, motivate your actual behaviour. It's what you actually do. And therefore, we've got to be upfront about that. And in the process, we've got to create value in one form or the other for the people who can actually sustain our journalism. And it's not just with money, but money takes money to produce journalism, as we were hearing earlier in terms of local journalism. But you can do local journalism also without money. And I've been working with a local newspaper, which is entirely run by volunteers, very experienced journalists amongst them. But because the money's not there, it requires something else. And that's probably not sustainable in the long run, but it's something to get it going. The beauty of the online economy is that actually the currency is attention. So you might not have money to pay for it, but if you can have attention, you can monetize that in another way. But to have people's attention, you've got to have the good journalism, which is the ethics and the values, but being upfront about the values so that it is clear what truth you're telling or what you're trying, but that's also where you connect. And this is where beliefs and values are so important, actually, because that's how you connect with your audience, which makes them stay reading your stories or listening to your stories. So yes, I do believe that it is possible. I just haven't figured it out yet.
And maybe I can just make a quick comment there. I remember just after Donald Trump was first elected, I was preaching, this is what you do when you are foolishly courageous or stupid. I was preaching in a church and I preached on, in a nuanced fashion, you get the leaders you deserve. Okay, and of course then I had to run very fast because all these Americans wanted to kill me. No, I'm only kidding. But I think what I would say in response to this is you get the journalists you deserve. I mean, who is it that these are the experts, the journalists, who receives what they give? It's us. You know, and if I can speak as a Christian, I mean, I would say one of the great scandals of the Christian church is that we do not demand healthy investigative journalism.
Yes, yeah.
And I think what we have got to do is find, so once we recognize that there's a diversity of beliefs in our culture, we've got to find our co-belligerents, who may be Muslims or Hindus or atheists, but who really want thick, rigorous investigative journalism. And then we've got to put our money where their mouths are.
The world in which we live is a world in which very powerful forces are systematically misusing journalism. Any thoughts about how real journalism can survive in that context?
I'm rather optimistic about common grace. I really do think that ill-intentioned people sometimes manage to get it right, and it comes out whether they think it's gonna or not. So, you know, I think this. I have never thought so much about journalism in my life, but I think a lot about my garden. You know, and it's kind of unforgiving. So if I'm going to be good at it and have it like me, you know, I've got to have this communion with it. And I think we kind of need to smell our way to that kind of authentic, authoritative intimacy with the real. So two things that come to mind on the last question, this one. Here in Western PA and into Ohio. Obviously, we're in post-industrial Ohio Valley. And where I used to live up in Aliquippa, they've got this outfit called Riverwise, which was funded by a grant. The grant has now been removed. But a former student of mine is a journalist with them, and I just got that piece this morning. And what they do is every time I hear from them, like once a month or whatever it is, I get 3 little stories that they've gotten from somewhere. And then it says on the top of it, here's why it matters that we republish this story, right? So which made me think after reading Jenny's book of the, what'd you call it, the preface to certain articles that told you how to read the article, which, you know, and presumably we on the newsletter have in common are being upset by nasty ecological and environmental things that are happening here that are just like abusing our beautiful river, La Belle Riviere, the Ohio River. The other thing that came to mind is, so this is Thomas Friedman. Thank you for being late. An optimist's guide to thriving in the age of accelerations. And he was really big. I wrote lots of notes down in here. We used to read it in humanities class. But he was really big on groups about the size of a dining table that would be kind of in solidarity, lively solidarity with each other. And he being from, where is he, from Milwaukee or somewhere, you know, where he grew up among that. It's a really good book about how it's this small kind of particular, lively, intimately connected community that then starts to have, you know, kind of this cross-fertilization to put something forward. So those are my thoughts.
Just to second what Esther said, my other way of putting it is, yeah, apart from human motivations and what people try, the world is a certain way. And if you're engaged in a practice and you don't follow the rules for that practice, it will fail. So people may try and mess up journalism any way they want. They will cease to be journalists. and that practice will end. Only if you do certain things can you be a journalist, similarly for mathematics or anything else. So the creation itself has a restraining effect on human beings, and creation itself is grace. So I'm hopeful.
So we are now going to go and celebrate. But before we do that, I'm just going to ask Prabhu if he wants to say a quick word or two and tell people how do they buy 10 copies of the book each.
It's been a great privilege to publish Jenny's book. And I think the great thing about her book, you know what happens with publishers. You get deluged with manuscripts and you've got to choose between them. So the question to ask is, why did I choose to publish Jenny's book? Well, of course, Jenny's a friend, so one looks at that kind of manuscript a bit more pleasantly, openly, and so on. But at the end of the day, publisher has to put his or her or their money behind it. And you're not going to put your money behind a horse that is incapable of walking, are you? So the question was, does this book have legs? And if this book has legs, what is the quality of those legs? And I want to suggest to you that the key leg that really matters in this book is how far back Jenny goes and the essential truths she recovers from history about what made journalism possible and what made journalism great. And once we've understood that, then we can answer the question, or begin to answer the question, what caused the decline of journalism from one of the most respected professions on the face of the earth to one of the least respected professions today. And the answer, in a word, is the loss of its roots. And the basic argument that Jenny's book makes is that unless those roots are recovered, the chances of public truth-telling will continue to decline. And the point that is made very powerfully in the book is that it took heroes to begin to establish what we call journalism. People wrote at the risk of their lives. And it may be that we'll come to that again. We are not far from that in many parts of the world. We are in that in many parts of the world. And it may be that that comes here too. So the question to ask ourselves is, where do we get the strength to be able to tell the truth at the cost of our lives? And when we get that kind of conviction, when we recover that kind of conviction, then we will begin to rebuild civilization. If you see civilization crumbling all around us, the reason for that is the loss of roots. And I think Jenny's book is a profound contribution to enable us to understand that, and therefore to begin to recover truth and therefore civilization. Thank you.